is our opposition, but I am in considerable sympathy with conservatives. I am often lazy myself. It's evenings when I am somewhat played out, when I'm likely to be most conservative. Everything that is highest and noblest in my composition is most pronounced when I'm not good for much. I may be quite savage mornings, but as my energy plays out, I become nobler and lazier and conservativer. Most likely, my last utterance will be a platitude if I've been dying long enough. If not, I shall probably laugh. I like to read my evening newspaper comfortably, and it is uncomfortably that I come upon any new idea or suggestion of the new in an evening newspaper. It's a botheration, and I don't understand it, and it will cost me some thinking. Oh well, I'll clip it out anyway. But where are the scissors? But they aren't. What? But where are the scissors? But they aren't. Has anybody a pin? Nobody has. There was a time when one would maneuver over to the edge of a carpet without having to leave one's chair and pull up a tack. But everybody has rugs nowadays. Oh well, let it go. Something in a newspaper about a mysterious hair clipper. This is a new department of data, though hair stealing links with other mysterious thefts. Where's a pin? Oh, well, there's nothing in particular about this matter of hair clipping. A petty thief stole hair to sell, of course, vague suggestions hanging over from reading of various phrases of black magic. But if there is a market for human hair clippers are accounted for. Still, and so I could go on every now and then for many years, feeling a haunt of a new idea, but feeling more comfortable if doing nothing about it. But daytimes I go to libraries, and if several times close together something is new to me in newspapers attracts my attention, I get the power somewhere to make a note of it. These vague new ideas that flutter momentarily in every mind. Sometimes they're as hard to catch as is the moment they flutter in. It's like trying to pin a butterfly without catching it. They're gone, they can't develop because one doesn't or can't note them and collect notes. We'd all be somewhat enlightened if that would be any good to us. Were it not for easy chairs. Where's the pin? Hereafter, I'm going to have a pet porcupine around the house. One can't learn much and also be comfortable. One can't learn much and let anybody else be comfortable. 2 cases of hairdressers, windows broken, and women's switches stolen, probably to sell to other hairdressers. I noted this just as an oddity. London, Daily Chronicle, July 9th, 1913, Paris, wealthy engineer named Luramagorg, arrested. At Luramagorg's residence, the police found locks of hair of 94 women. I put this item with others upon freaks of collectors. In Oklahoma City, July 1907, somebody collected ears. Bodies of 3 men, ears cut off. In April 1913, a collector who was known as Jack the Slipper Snatcher operated in the subways of New York City. Girl going up the steps of a subway exit, 1 foot up from a step, the snatch of her slipper. The fantastic or the amusing, but it is as close to the appalling as is the beautiful to the hideous. The murder of the Connors child in New York in July 1916 hacked hair from his victim. I have only 2 records of male victims of hair clippers. I conceive that once upon a time abundant whiskers were tempting. Where do manufacturers of false whiskers get their material? Both of these victims were children. There was a case of 3 gypsy women who waylaid a boy aged 8 and cut off his hair. That they were gypsies may be of occult suggestion, but this could be simply the theft of something that could be sold. A case is told of in The People, London, January 23rd, 1921. The residents of Glamsharrock Farm, Ankleck, Ayrshire, Scotland, awoke one morning to find that during the night a burglar had made off with various articles. There were screams from the bedroom of a young female member of the household. Upon awakening, she had learned that her hair had been cut off. I say that this case was told of, but a case of what? And in the New York Sun, March 7th, 1928, a case of what? An old man had entered the home of Angelo Nappi, 83 and a half Garside Street, Newark, New Jersey, and had cut off the hair of his 3 little daughters. Old age and youth, male and female, there is the haunt in stories of hair clippers of something that is not of hair selling. If Jack the Slipper Snatcher were in the second-hand business, he'd have maneuvered girls into having both feet in the air. I take a story from The Medium and Daybreak, December 13th, 1889. It was copied from the Brockville, Ontario Daily Times, November 13th. There were doings in the home of George Daig, a farmer living in the township of Clarendon, province of Quebec, Canada. With Daig lived his wife, 2 young children, and a little girl, age 11, Dina McLean, who had been adopted from an orphan asylum. The report from which I quote was the result of investigations by Percy Woodcock. I know that that sounds fictitious, but just the same, Percy Woodcock was a well-known painter. Also, Mr. Woodcock was a spiritualist. It could be that he colored as much on paper as on canvas. The first of the uncanny occurrences, as they are so persistently called by persons who do not realize how common they are, was upon September 15th. Window panes broke. There were unaccountable fires. As many as 8 a day. Stones of unknown origin were thrown. A large stone struck one of the children, and strange to say, it did not hurt her in the least. And I give my opinion that in comments upon my writings, my madness has been overemphasized. Of course, I couldn't pass any alienist's examination, but could any alienist. But when I come upon a detail like this of stones striking people harmlessly in an Ontario newspaper, and have noted the same detail in a story in a Constantinople newspaper, and have come upon it in newspapers of Adelaide, South Australia, and Cornwall, England, and other places, and when I note that it is no standardized detail of ghost stories, so that probably no one of the writers had ever of anything of any of the kind before, I consider myself sane and reasonable in giving heed to this, if there were sanctity and reasonableness. One afternoon, little Dinah felt her hair, which hung in a long braid down her back, suddenly pulled, and on crying out, the family found her braid almost cut off, simply hanging by a few hairs. On the same day, the little boy said that something had pulled his hair all over. Immediately, it was seen by his mother that his hair also had been cut off in chunks, as it were, all over his head. Woodcock told of a voice that was heard. This is an element that does not appear to appear in the great majority of cases of poltergeist disturbances. His story is of conversations that were carried on between him and an invisible being. There was a feud between the Daggs and neighbors named Wallace, and the voice accused Mr. Wallace of having sent him or her or it or whatever to persecute the Daggs. Most of the time, the house was crowded. When this accusation was heard, a number of farmers went to the home of the Wallaces and returned with Mrs. Wallace. The story is that the voice again accused Mrs. Wallace, but then made statements that were so inconsistent that it was not believed. It was an obscene voice, and Mr. Woodcock was shocked. He reasoned with it, pointing out that there were farmeresses present, and the voice was ashamed of itself. It repented. It sang a hymn and departed. I take something from the Religio Philosophical Journal. October 4th, 1873, and following issues is copied from the Durand, Wisconsin Times, and other newspapers. Home of Mr. Lynch, 14 miles from Menominee, Wisconsin. Had moved from Indiana a few years before and was living with the second wife and the 4 children of the first wife. She had died shortly before he had moved. Lynch went to town one day and returned with a dress for his wife. Soon afterward, this dress was found in the barn, slashed to shreds. Objects all over the house vanished. Lynch bought another dress. This was found in the barn, cut down to fit one of the children. Eggs rose from tables, teacups leaped, and a pan of soft soap wandered from room to room. One of the children, a boy age 6, was thought to be playing tricks because phenomena centered around him. Nobody lambasted him until he confessed, but he was tied in a chair, teacups as lively as ever. There was the usual openness. No midnight mysteries of a haunted house. Sightseers were arriving in such numbers that there was no room in the house for them. Several hundred of them lounged outside, sitting on fences or leaning against anything that would hold them up, ready for a dash into the house at any announcement of doings. One day, one of the children, named Morena, was standing close to Mrs. Lynch. Her hair was sheared off close to her scalp and vanished. There have been single instances, and there have been hair clipping scares that were attributed to mass psychology. Also, I have noted cases in which girls were accused of having cut off their own hair, hoping to take up some newspaper space. My only reason for doubt is the satisfactory endings of these accounts, which statements that the girls had confessed. There were accounts in the London newspapers of December 2nd and 10th, 1922, of a scare in places east and west of London. In a street of Uxbridge, Middlesex, a woman found that her braid had been cut off. She had been aware of no such operation, but remembered that in a crowd her hat had been pushed over her eyes. According to the stories, women were terrorized by a vanishing man, disappeared as if by magic. It is an uncatchable, again, a defiant fellow operating openly as if confident that he could not be caught. Note that these are not ghost stories. They are stories of human beings who seem to have ghostly qualities or powers. Doris Whiting, age 17, approaching her home in the village of Orpington, saw a man leaning on a gate. As she was passing him, he grabbed her and cut off her hair. The girl screamed, and her father and brother ran to her. They searched, but the clipper was unfindable. A maid employed by Mrs. Glanfield of Crofton Hall, Orpington, was pounced upon by a man who hacked off a handful of her hair. He vanished. There was excitement in Orpington at the end of a bus route. A girl exclaimed that much of her hair had been cut off. Merely this does not seem mysterious. It seems that a deft fellow could have done this without being seen by the other passengers. But other girls were saying whatever girls say when they discover that their hair has been cut off. At Enfield, a girl named Brand, employed as a typist at the Constitutional Club, was near the clubhouse one morning about 8 o'clock when a man grabbed her and cut off her hair. No trace of him was found, though the search was taken up a minute after the outrage. I have noted occurrences in London which look as if there was a desire not generally for hair or for anybody's hair, but for the hair and then more hair of one victim. See the Kensington London Express, August 23, 1907. Twice a girl's hair had been clipped in a London street. She felt a clip the third time. The girl accused a man. He was arrested and was arraigned at the Mansion House. Neither the girl nor anybody else had seen him as a clipper, but he had walked sharply away, and when accused, had run. Nothing was said of either scissors or hair in any quantity found in his possession. The hair that had been cut off was not found, but there was some hair on his jacket, and he was found guilty and was fined. I have record of another case of mass psychology. It is my expression that the description mass psychology does partly apply to it, just as would horizontal ineptitude or metacarpal iridescence, or any other idea or combination of ideas apply to some degree to anything. In any existence of the hyphen, it is impossible to be altogether wrong or right. This is why it is so hard to learn anything. It is hard to overcome that which cannot be altogether wrong with that which cannot be altogether right. I look forward to the time when I shall refuse to learn another thing, having accumulated errors enough. In The Spiritualist, July 21st, 1876. was published a story of mass excitement in Nanking and other cities of China. Uncatchables, who could not even be seen, were cutting off the pigtails of Chinamen, and there was a panic. More of the story was told, but I preferred to take accounts from a local newspaper. I give details as I found them in various issues of the North China Herald from May 20th to September 16th, 1876. Panic in Nanking and other towns as it spread to Shanghai. People believed that invisibles were cutting off their pigtails. It was said that regard this story of the invisibles as one would, there was no doubt that a number of pigtails had been cut off and that great alarm existed in consequence. Many Chinamen have lost their tails, and we can hardly admit that the imaginary spirits are real men with steel shears, for it could hardly happen that someone would not be detected for this in the act of cutting. The most likely explanation is that the agents, whoever they may be, operate by means of some potent acid. Panic spreading to Hangzhou. Numerous cases are reported, but few of them are authentic. The cases are increasing daily. In the streets of Shanghai, men fearing attacks behind were holding their pigtails in front of them. Quack doctors were advertising charms. Probably the reputable physicians devoted to their own incantations were indignant about this. The military commandment stationed soldiers in various parts of the city. Suffice it to mention that amongst much that is untrustworthy, there seem good grounds for believing that some children have actually lost part of their tails. Sellers of charms suspected of cutting off pigtails to stimulate business, mischievous children suspected, missionaries accused, and anti-Christian placards appearing in public places. Rumors of drops of ink thrown in people's faces by invisible agencies and people so treated dying. Inhabitants of Woodson and Suchow mad. Shit. Hold on. Where was I? Hold on. It wasn't made mad. It was just mad. And people so treated dying. Inhabitants of Wusun and Suchow, mad with terror, the lynching of suspected persons, arrests, and torture. People had suspended work and had organized into guards. At Suchow broke out the crushing mania, or a belief that at night people were crushed in their beds. The beating of gongs was taken up so that the supply ran out, and anybody who wanted a gong had to wait for one to be made. The standardized ways of telling of such a scare is to elaborate upon the extremities at the climax of the excitement and to ignore or slightly to touch upon the incidents that preceded. There was a panic or a mania in China. Perhaps there was. I have no Chinaman's account. For all I know, some Chinaman may have sent out an account to his newspaper of us beating gongs during the parrot disease scare of the year 1929, having seen a janitor knocking off dust from the cover of an ash can. There was probably considerable excitement that was the product of delusions. Nevertheless, it does seem acceptable that there were cases of mysterious hair clippings.